This happened when I was a kid, living in La Mesa, California. I was 5 to 7 years old, I think. We belonged to a moderately large Protestant church with a cheerful congregation, and all of the families were tight-knit, but there were plenty of non-regulars who stopped by. I have always been a very willful person, with a bit of an invincibility complex and a feverish curiosity. As a little girl, you couldn't tell me not to go somewhere before finding that I was already there. I loved exploring and being alone, and this story is about the day when I realized that it wasn't always the best idea. It's hard to explain how stubborn I am in general, and my parents had noted this and always tried to communicate concepts of danger and fear to me, but it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. If something is scary, then you should confront it and fight it, right? That was my motto, I guess, at 6 years old. I had run along cliffs and swam out farther than I was supposed to, where riptides were known to happen, and played in the street and went looking for strangers to meet. You can imagine my poor mother, but this day was the first time in my life that I had ever really felt the pang of real danger or a tiny thrill of concern that something very bad might be about to happen. When church would let out on Sundays, everyone would proceed to the courtyard or the offices or the kitchens to help, and no one remained in any part of the sanctuary after some minutes. Since I was stuck waiting for my parents to leave, I liked to wander around up in the balcony where the choir would sing and play with the organ or stained glass. Sometimes I would sneak around in the back trying to get out onto the roof or playing where the vestments were kept. There were behind the scenes areas separated by doors from the elevated front of the sanctuary, and I had just been poking around in there when I decided to leave and heard someone call to me. I turned around and saw this guy, maybe 20s to 30s, stringy blondish hair and clothing kinda indicative of a disorganized mind, not a homeless person, but casual and abused enough that even a younger me recognized that this guy was a little different. He greeted me warmly, as though we were good friends. I recognized that I had met him once before, in this very same room. He had introduced himself to me as people from the choir walked around us to put their things away. He had seemed a bit flustered at the time, and had mostly made small talk about things, and then I left. I didn't remember his name or anything about him really, but I greeted him and was polite. There was no one else back there. The door on the other side was locked. I knew, so I wondered how he had gone behind me without my noticing. I had gone all the way around when I first came in, didn't I? And there hadn't been anyone there. It didn't make a lot of sense. He asked me if everything was okay, and I said, yes, thanks, but I had to go. And he said, wait a minute, don't you want to hear how I'm doing? And I said, yes, but that my parents were waiting for me, which was a lie. The guy proceeded to say he was fine and then asked me for a hug, already coming in for one. I said okay because it was clearly going to happen anyway, and I didn't yet want him to realize how opposed to the idea of being near him I was. Now I wish that someone was there. Anyone else, but especially another adult. I started to think about how unlikely it was that anyone would ever come in here, how far away everyone was, how even the sanctuary had no good acoustics, and the front wasn't all the way that far. No one would hear me if I yelled. He hung on to me in the hug for a very, very long time. It felt like minutes were going by. Now I knew that something was definitely wrong about this. I said, okay, well, sorry, but I have to go. And I felt him begin to let go, but then pause. Goosebumps, and not the good kind. I stepped back and he finally let go, but the look in his eyes was different, as though he knew what I was thinking and feeling, that I was lying to him and that I didn't want to be there anymore. His eyes were kind of slitted as he looked down at me. He was obviously considering. I smiled, trying to be as convincing as I could, hoping to make him believe that I was having a good time and that he should keep playing his previous game. I didn't understand the situation at the full time, but the basics of the animalistic behavior at play made sense to me. After a moment of silence, I said, wishing I trusted myself to remember his name, "Nice to see you. Hopefully I see you next week when we're not leaving." "Bye," smiled Big, looked him directly in the eyes as I did so, and then turned around to ascend in the few steps it took to get out the door and into the sanctuary. I could feel him watching me, still considering. Trying not to run, those few seconds slowed down in my mind and were some of the slowest of my life. I think. Every instant I thought he was going to grab me and pull me back down into the room. When I hit the sanctuary after a few steps, I skipped fast for the rest of the way, and finally hit the doors back out into the sound of all the people talking in the bright sunlight. "So, creepy church guy, I hope we never, ever meet again." My mother is an intensely devoted Catholic and has been since my very early childhood. She's always been extremely active as well, participating in various forms of worship organized by mainstream and not so mainstream Catholic sects. Most of my bizarre memories involve my mother and these activities and people. As a child, I was told the Virgin Mary presented herself to me in a vision another time. I was told that I was an agent of the devil in front of a church full of peers. Needless to say, I am no longer religious. However, as a young child, I did not have a choice in the matter, and my mother brought me along to most of her church activities. The incident occurred when I was in kindergarten, so I was 5 or 6. My mother formed part of the church choir and had weekly practice on a weekday at around 6 p.m. or so. Normally there was 1 or 2 other kids my age, and we'd play just outside the practice room in the church parking lot. On this particular day, no other kids had been brought, which happened occasionally, but as a little kid, the only playmate I needed was my imagination. The rehearsal had been going on for a while, and I was playing right outside the door. I knew I had to stay close by, and my mom had told me to stay on the sidewalk. When a slightly run-down looking pickup truck pulled into the parking lot and strangely parked right in the middle with the driver's door towards me. The man inside the truck opened his door and without getting out began speaking to me. I think he was about 30 to 50 years old, hard to tell at that age. All adults are of an age to a kid. Also, it's been 20 years and the details are a little fuzzy. Well, he started talking to me, but since he had stopped in the middle of the parking lot, I didn't understand what he was saying. He was probably some 15 feet away from the sidewalk. I just assumed he probably wanted to ask for another adult, so I walked close enough to hear him. I lived in PR, so the following exchange in my translation from Spanish. "Hey, are you bored?" he asked, smiling. I automatically got a little worried at that. I'd been taught stranger danger, so I hung back. But I actually was bored at that point, so I told him yes. "Want to go home with me and play some games?" "Your dad told me to come pick you up. Come on." He was still smiling and sitting back in the driver's seat. He looked relaxed and friendly enough to me, and I really wanted to go back to my house already, so his offer actually sounded good. I lived pretty close, so I thought maybe my dad had actually sent this guy. Something about him was making me nervous, but I was considering it. I walked a bit closer to the truck, paused, and asked, "Whose house?" "Mine." I ran. I knew he was lying. My parents would have never let me go to someone else's house. It was something I had been scolded for before. I turned and ran into the practice room and just clutched my mother until it was time to go. To this day, it makes my stomach turn to imagine what would have happened if things had played out differently. Had I gone into that truck, I would have mostly likely disappeared and never been found. The guilt would have destroyed my mother and likely the lives of my older brother and father, and my little brother may have not even been born. I'm so thankful for that alarm that went off in my head and told me to run. So, creepy guy in the parking lot, I hope we never, ever meet again.